Good morning, it's October the 17th, 2024. The summer weather is back. The race for the presidency is getting tighter and tighter, and Britain is bracing itself for huge rises in taxes and public spending. Promises made and promises broken. Welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And I'm Kieran McCarthy in London.
And today, coming up, last week we talked about an announcement by Google about a new global signal exchange, the GSE. We just clarify a bit more what that's about. Today is NIS2 Day. The date that member states of the EU must transpose a directive that aims to improve cybersecurity in the European Union. Blimey, what's that all about? Kieran wants to discuss the Chagos Islands who manage the .io. There's changes to that management of that top-level domain. Is this modern-day colonialism? And finally, Ofcom is stepping up the ante in anticipation of the Online Safety Act, which comes into force in the UK early next year. Somewhat ironically, at the same time, it's been reported that Twitter X is moving another step closer towards Elon Musk's promise to remove the block button from social media timelines. Interesting conundrum. Thank you. That was a great jingle there, guys. I don't know if anyone saw the confetti. I was just looking at this camera. But anyway, first of all, before we talk to Emily about the GSE, please do follow us on our socials on TikTok and Instagram. We need you. We need the crowd. So please join. Please get others to follow us. So, Emily, last week we talked about this announcement by Google and we just sort of squeezed it in there. We're quite proud of it because the announcement by Google is actually about us as well. And it's this global signal exchange. What is the global signal exchange?
The Global Signal Exchange is a partnership between the Global Anti-Scam Alliance and the DNS Research Federation, and Google has come on board, and the objective is to fight scams and fraud through the exchange of threat signals in a timely way through a single global platform, and that applies to all sectors. So what each partner brings is the Global Anti-Scam Alliance has a huge network. It has more than 100 members from across the world, spanning law enforcement, the private sector, finance sector, and so on. And its membership actually tasked the Global Anti-Scam Alliance with finding a data sharing platform, because everyone's talking about data sharing. No one ever does it. We're going to do it. We're going to stop talking and start doing. But it is easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Why is that needed, data sharing? And just to be clear, you've sort of been using data and signals. Is there a difference between those?
I think that's a great question, Luz. So the preferred terminology is signals sharing, which I think people naturally get twitchy about data because it starts to get you thinking about personal data, victim data. This is not what the Global Signal Exchange is about. It's more similar, I think, to a global neighbourhood watch type of situation where people are like, oh, something weird happened with my bins, and you're not really pointing the finger at particular criminals or victims.
So you're sharing worries,
weird stuff,
worries and concerns or patterns of behaviour that have maybe gone wrong in the past, rather than what you call evidence grade information.
Yeah, this is really about disruption, the sort of the evidence that law enforcement require to actually get prosecutions is of a much higher grade. This is a sort of cross-industry type of approach, which would also involve, accredited law enforcement to enable a rapid response, to also track trends through leaderboards and charts for the DNS Research Federation, this is an enormous validation of our technical work, because not only did the Global Anti-Scam Alliance select us, but also Google, after several years of searching and evaluating all of the different initiatives that are going across the world, because scams are an enormous problem. They cost consumers estimated $1 trillion per year, and it's kind of out of control. So something needs to be done.
And Kieran, this makes me think about, the platforms that are out there. We've obviously put together a platform, but we've been in an office coding for 20 years. You worked as a tech journalist for the Register for many years. There are lots of people promising this stuff, aren't there? But would you agree there's a gap between actually just sort of saying you're going to do something and you end up doing it on a spreadsheet and actually doing a whole platform for it?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, if it was easy, then we'd already been solved. It's like a lot of issues with the internet, requires a lot of coordination. And there's the almost infinite number of possible ways of approaching it, and huge number of different issues around it. What is, how do we know that this is this? What patterns is this like? How do we get this data? Who wants to share this information? Who is behind it? And the scammers know all this. So the scammers have got very adept at hiding where they're putting information, and also moving scams between different platforms, registering domains under different names. I mean, it's a very difficult thing, but it's got so big now, and I think everybody knows somebody who's been scammed with a dodgy website or a dodgy email at this point. Something has to be done.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of money put into it, but I've yet to see a really good actual solution. So I'm hoping this one will start the ball rolling.
Yeah, and hopefully it starts with a big load of data, and then you can feed it into the AI algorithms. You can actually bring those communities together, and you actually have somebody to share those signals with. So we're all super excited. I'm not going to dwell on this subject today, because I thought we would just do a little explainer about that, and because this pot's going to keep bubbling. So we'll do a more dedicated one on that as the global signal exchange becomes more and more of a reality. Anyway, today, as we said before, and let's have another go at this, today is NIS2 Day, which is a fantastic day. As we were saying, the date that member states of the EU must transpose a directive that aims to improve cybersecurity in the European Union. Who named this NIS2 Day? I mean, it's not
we
really
did.
We did. I thought, though, there was an official guideline that says by October the 17th something has to happen.
Yes. So the directive itself, there are two types of European law. One is a regulation, most famously the General Data Protection Regulation. That goes straight into member states' law without anything having to happen. With a directive, this is the sort of principle of subsidiarity at work. So the Commission set the minimum requirements, and then it's up to every single member state to pass a national law. And today is the day that every member state is supposed to have passed that law.
And so today I was trying to make sense of where we're at, what's actually happening with the rollout of this directive across member states. Because it's interesting, that everyone quakes at the EU Commission making a directive and you've got to implement it. So I was asking our own Joanna Grant, who's been working on this in some detail, and she was starting to explain it to me, and I just said, let's drag her up, because actually
Joanna,
I need
none of us know what's
so
going
everybody
on.
Welcome Joanna Grant from the DNS Research Federation. Joanna, can you try and help us make sense of what's actually been happening with this NIS2 directive? Can you just explain what you've been doing for a while with this law and tracking this directive?
So yes, I've just been looking online weekly to see if there are any updates on the internet as to whether countries have made any progress in transposing this law.
How many countries are there now? Just remind me.
27.
27,
Yes.
okay.
27 countries.
And so you've been breaking it down into stages, haven't you?
Yes,
Can you give
we
us a
have.
bit of an...
And what does it go into? What can people see as a result of your work?
Yes. So we've been creating a NIS2 tracker, which is available on the DNS Research Federation website. And it breaks down the transposition into 4 stages. Not started. That's quite self-explanatory. Preparation phase. So that's where countries are prepping draft laws and running consultations to gather opinions on how to implement the law. Then there's the transposition stage. That's more of a point in time. It's either transposed or not.
And that means that they've passed a law.
Yeah, they've passed the law. It is in their national law now. And then
that sounds all very...
then there's implementation.
Yes.
Yes, which is where sometimes...
That's it, finished.
Well, not quite, you'd hope. But it's a bit complicated. Sometimes countries leave things to secondary legislation. So instead of...
Sorry, you're laughing at me because I thought this was all a well-ordered process.
A well-oiled machine.
You get a lovely template from the Commission that then all the other countries follow and they just repeat the words in their national law and roll it out. Is that the case?
Right. Maybe we can have a look at the tracker. I don't know if
now,
you guys can get it up on the screen.
Although this is a podcast, we are now...
So how many have actually put a law in place right now of the 20?
So at the moment, 2 have transposed. Okay, so that is the first point where you're actually fully compliant with the deadline. That's Croatia and Italy, right?
Yes.
And 4 have reached the implementation stage, which is actually where as the Americans would say, where the rubber hits the road, where you have to get the guidelines in place. You have to say, well, what does this stuff actually mean for industry? What do we expect to happen?
So Joanna, just try and summarise what that does mean. Those who have, they're fully on board, they put it into their law, they may or may not be running consultations after that. But what does it mean for the managers of internet assets? What does that mean? What's going to happen?
I would say we're not really sure yet. We don't really know the answers.
Are they going to have massive fines for getting things wrong? Or
potentially, yes.
Right.
Yes. I think some countries have gone quite heavy on the fines, particularly Belgium. I think, Kieran, can you give us some intel on...
Belgium, for sure. I was tracking Belgium for a while, and I was very surprised that they came in with much stronger than the EU directive said, and they're just going to say we're going to suspend domains if you don't do this, and we're going to fine you if you don't do it.
And so, say BBC is a domain name, so the Belgians will suspend the bbc.eu, I presume, if they're unhappy about something that you've done.
Well, so it's whether the data is accurate or not. So if so it would be bbc.be, isn't it, Belgium?
Yes, I see. Yes.
And so if you don't have accurate data about who actually registers that domain and owns that domain, then yes, you could be in serious trouble.
So if a manager of the BBC has left and he was the one who originally registered that domain name and leaves and they can't find him and they haven't got accurate details and they're not able to update the records, they can just take down the whole thing.
It's a pretty extreme case, but theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
I think that's right. But I mean, it won't happen like that. The biggest issue will be these sort of the large number of domains that people sort of got unusual names on, like Mickey Mouse Limited and they just haven't verified them. They don't really know who did it or who runs it. And there's question marks over who really runs it. And then that would be a query would be put saying...
And Emily, we have fun jumping to extreme examples, but this is genuinely dealing with the problem of what we call know your customer, that people in this industry don't really know their own customers.
Yeah, there's a range of attitudes towards knowing customers. I actually think that as a group, the European country code registries like the .be's of this world, the .dk's, have really good practices and they take data quality very seriously. An aspect of the NIS2 directive that's a little bit hidden, and I was looking at it yesterday, I had to really search for where it is in the directive, but it actually applies outside of each member state. So for domain registries, registrars, resellers, proxy providers, if they are providing services that are consumed in the European Union, they are also caught by this directive. And as Joanna says, each country is kind of doing their own thing when it comes to the WHOIS. So you might be operating, primarily with, Croatian customers or something, but the law in a different member state gives big fines or requires you to keep the data for 25 years, which I've seen in some of them. And so there's going to be quite a confusing mess.
I'm sorry.
That applies across, US providers and so on. And I'm not sure how ready everybody is.
And this is something that you've been talking about for a long time: is laws being made in one part of the world that actually affect you in other parts of the world. So if I'm selling websites or domain names that are to Belgian citizens, for example, then those rules apply to me even though I live in a different outside the EU. Joanna, just try and help me understand where we're at then today, because today is NIS2 Day. Happy birthday, happy Christmas, and NIS2 Day. But I'm not any. All it sounds to me is that. Is it fair to say 21 have not actually hit the deadline?
Yes. So Croatia, Belgium, Hungary, Lithuania, Latvia and Italy have definitely transposed. Potentially Greece as well. I've heard rumours that they've transposed, but I can't actually find a law on the internet that has been transposed.
Okay, so this is our appeal. Anyone in Greece,
yes,
could you please help us?
Yes. Please. And in fact, anyone in any of the member states who is tracking this, because we are doing our best to figure out what's going across every member state, and Joanna's doing an amazing job, but it's difficult.
But why do you have to be a forensic detective for something that's meant to be open and transparent? You go into consultations and you're not, and it's also complex ideas that are rolled out, and everybody's doing their own thing as well at a time of virtual international emergency in terms of the sort of issues and the harms online that they're sort of trying to address. Well, it wasn't really a question, actually. That was more of just a whinge from me.
I think pass that one to Kieran. Kieran, help us out here.
Yeah. Kieran, just say something about this. This does sound like a total mess.
But when it comes to laws, the world is quite complicated.
Thank you for that,
sounds
Kieran.
like Yoda.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you, Joanna, for being dragged on today without any notice to help us make sense of this clear thing. But your work on it is crystal clear, and we'll carry on and we'll get you on later in the year to see how they carry on doing. But thanks very much, Joanna.
Thank you.
Great. Joanna Grant, everyone. That's fantastic. So before we go on to our next one, it's time for our Guilty Pleasure Online. Emily Taylor, what is your guilty pleasure online?
Well, Lucien, you mentioned that the US elections are really coming close now. My guilty pleasure online is checking the 538 polling site multiple times per day. Yeah. And yeah, I think I'm anxious about the outcome. And it's sort of, I find it, well, it's not actually helping my anxiety by checking it multiple times per day. This is hysterical.
We need some sort of confession box between us.
So really. I don't know, Kieran, do you what's your favourite polling site, or are you just sort of because I asked someone in the office, are you doing this as well? And they went, no.
No.
Kieran, can you help me out here? Is anyone else doing this?
Yeah, I do it. I mean, I was
Oh, sorry, this is turning into Alcoholics Anonymous or something. I do it. I must admit, I do it as well.
I mean, you do track it, and they bring, especially in America, where they have polls all the time, and they're fairly good polls too. And yeah, you do
I'm
track
so
them.
worried about
You
Pennsylvania.
build in a certain direction, and then when it doesn't happen, it kind of ruins your day a bit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
getting really close.
you two, we're meant to be balanced, neutral. We're giving the other side of the view. We're not really lobbying for Trump or Kamala. We're just, we're meant to be able to see both sides of the
I'm
argument.
pretty happy to say that I'm supporting Kamala Harris in this one.
Yes, so am I. I mean, I think
do you
that
know what? We had no idea.
one of the candidates is like a threat to the world's peace and security, and the other might be kind of okay.
Oh, I love it that this is actually a podcast and we actually don't have to do all of that bollocks. Anyway, in other news, Ofcom are stepping up the ante in anticipation of the Online Safety Act, which comes into force in the UK early next year. Ofcom boss Dame Melanie Dawes said that Ofcom are expecting very significant changes from the social media platforms. Somewhat ironically, Twitter has just announced that they're a step closer to removing the block button from social media timelines. Musk says that the block button makes no sense. He's also said that the change will allow X to show more user content, including more posts from people who are commonly blocked. Now, how does that fit? Removing a block button from people who you're finding upsetting on your X channel, how does that square with people? Ofcom saying that people are going to need to be able to take themselves out of group chats. That doesn't seem to square, does it?
Well, I mean, Kieran's mentioned this before when we've been talking about Twitter X in Brazil, that the platform seems to be on a headlong collision course with the democracy's regulators, if you like.
Yes, we saw in Brazil they've actually blocked them completely, haven't they?
They have.
I can't remember if that's still in effect or not.
No, I don't know whether it's still in effect, Kieran. But
it's back, is it? It's back. We've just been told it's back.
Is it back? Yeah. But yeah, it shows how hard it is to actually ban massive platforms. But I think the thrust of what Dame Melanie Dawes is saying is that we need to do better as societies to protect vulnerable groups and particularly young people, women and girls, who might have hate speech, they might have stalkers, they might have people who are just trolling them constantly. And yeah, I think for very privileged white guys like Elon Musk, they can't see any downside to getting rid of a block button, partly because I think a lot of people are blocking him. But for vulnerable groups, it's actually a lifeline that keeps them on the platform.
Kieran, setting aside Musk, obviously we can just keep on talking about Twitter X and what they're up to, but this is generally a new sort of important development coming from the UK regulator. They're saying you're basically going to have to read content and try and protect people, and that involves then good old AI, doesn't it?
I mean, they already do quite a lot of AI in an effort to do it. I mean, it's worth saying that these platforms do actually do quite a lot already. It's not like they're not doing anything, although Twitter and X is probably maybe an exception. And by the way, in Brazil, he did what I predicted he would, and the company backed down.
Right.
And then it's back up again. So that will happen, but we are at an interesting interface between where regulators and, governments and regulators are pushing on these platforms, and they are pushing back, and we're trying to find a balance. And Ofcom so far, I mean, it's sort of making it's being a bit tough, or saying it's going to be tough. But we'll see. We'll see when it comes out with what its guidelines are, and we'll see how it imposes them. But it's warning the industry but it's intending to be tough. And so we'll see what happens.
And just thinking about that, because I think, the AI is incredible and it's getting better, but it's not there yet. If you think of this Internet Seriously podcast, we run a few adverts to raise awareness. It thinks that the algorithm thinks that we are a political campaigning group. And so every time we run an advert, it thinks that we're campaigning for an election, and we have to object several times before the advert is allowed, because you just have to try and get through the AI. And this is where the AI fails, in my view. It's a bit like the Oxford traffic system. When things fail, you need humans and management. And the AI seems to be an attractor to getting rid of managers and humans, and then you're sort of left with nothing, wouldn't you say? I mean, you become more and more dependent on the people that mediate the AI and help where things go wrong.
Yeah, and also, I mean, you have to account for algorithms. I mean, a lot of the issue is not so much the content, and there's a lot of content which just sort of treads a fine line, but isn't illegal. But if that is promoted and seen by lots of people, it can have a very detrimental effect. So the platforms warn, and they're right to warn, that if they come, with heavy regulation, that they will just scale the whole thing right back, or they'll stick on a bunch more extra warnings like that you're receiving. And they say, well, we're just going to have to do this because otherwise we risk fines. The truth is, what really needs to happen, it's going to take time, is there has to be a cultural shift at these platforms where they start taking it seriously and start thinking, actually, we need to make sure that we reduce this amount of damage.
Emily, taking it seriously about what? If I don't like what somebody said and I found it upsetting and disturbing because I don't agree with their view of how to breed chipmunks, I can have that taken down. The platform's got to intervene.
Well, there has to be a lawful reason why they would take it down, or it's not just because of you not liking it. It's about the concept of harm. And actually harm, we think we understand the term, but there's things that are actually illegal, like encouraging somebody to take their own life. That is unlawful, that is illegal. But what about promoting anorexia? What about promoting self-harm? Those fall into a category we call legal but harmful. And we are just really unsure of the impact on young minds and young people of exposure to this kind of completely untrammeled content. But what we are seeing is an epidemic of mental health problems in our young people, particularly young women and girls, and they are driven rhythmically towards harmful content. And I think that we're really only beginning to understand what a deep impact that makes on people at very important developmental stages.
And this is the key, isn't it, Kieran? This sort of like, we're moving from platforms which are just about, white guy developers in California having fun with their platforms to actually having to understand and think about humans.
Yeah, if you talk to the experts in this field, and if you talk to teachers, they will say, this is a major problem. This is causing real damage, and we need to act now. In fact, they were saying we need to act 5-10 years ago. So this cannot come soon enough for the people that actually deal, particularly with young people who are, live their lives online. Online is just as real as offline is for them. So it is a big problem, and it is a complicated problem. And then Ofcom is flagging that they're willing to come hard on it, but we'll see. We'll see. But like I say, I think the biggest issue is going to be there has to be a cultural shift in mindset at these platforms, and that's difficult. They're mostly tech companies and not cultural organizations.
Yeah, we had one example of a director of a symphony orchestra who was making some modernization changes in her orchestra a few weeks ago. And she said one of the journalists didn't like what she was doing and had written 30 articles about her. Now, that's all arguably lawful, but it's also one could feel unsafe if somebody's sort of focusing on you that intensely and repetitively. And I think that's where it starts to really get hard, that sort of, I wouldn't say sweet spot, but that bit in the middle, which is not overtly breaking the law, but it is harming people's...
Yeah, it gets you into an uncomfortable zone, doesn't it? Of course, everybody's got the right to their opinion and to express their opinion, particularly the world of criticism of the arts is a very well-established one. But what about when it goes over the line and starts looking a bit more similar to stalking, not making any comment about any particular examples?
Yeah, thank you. Well, on a lighter note, let's discuss Kieran's one about... do we say Chagos or Kagos Islands? Anyway, before we talk about that, it's time for our Tech Room 101. Room 101. Emily, it's you again. Emily Taylor, what is your Tech Room 101?
My Tech Room 101 is passwords. I don't think we've done it before, have we?
No, we haven't. That's
passwords.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so we
can put a man on the
internet.
moon, we can sequence the genome, but we haven't figured out anything that works as an alternative to passwords.
Now, just to help you, Kieran, why she's going on about this is that she's done a bit of research on passwords, because I heard her this morning talking on Radio Berkshire about passwords. So come on, let's hear your homework.
So homework is the US government have put out some advice saying, look, you don't need to change your passwords regularly, which is actually something that the UK National Cybersecurity Centre has been saying for years, but some platforms do actually prompt you to change your password every few months, and that kind of adds a layer of uncertainty and another thing you can fit. Is it my old password or is it my new? What did I change it to? Blah blah blah.
Kieran, do you love passwords?
I hate passwords. I use a password manager.
Yes.
And I have literally hundreds of passwords for everything in my life, and I'm having to do multiple passwords just to get at my email. I mean, it drives me bonkers.
And the worst is when you haven't updated your password manager and you put in the wrong password, and then I've just completely lost access to my Facebook account years ago. I have no idea what I did. And
it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
It's a bit embarrassing.
Facebook's one of our sponsors.
Yeah, it's
one of our
very
many
embarrassing,
sponsors.
and I'm sorry to anybody from Facebook who might be listening to this, but it would be great to talk to a human and get back into my family group.
AI.
But it's just so complicated, and when you're thinking about elderly people who might not have the sharpest memory, trying to do tech with elderly people involves at least half an hour of password recovery before you even get, and then you can't remember what you were supposed to be doing in the first place.
Anyway,
because you're so angry.
Sorry, Kieran, this is just far too interesting, but we're gonna let this go. Emily Taylor's Tech Room 101 is passwords. You want to put passwords in the bin, but you don't want to forget them.
I don't want to forget them, and I don't want to have all of my accounts exposed to criminals either. So
Kieran.io, what's that all about?
Yeah, so this is every now and again there's a CCTLD story that pops up, and there's another one. So the UK government has decided to hand over the Chagos Islands, which are south of India, Indian Ocean, near the Maldives. And there's a bit of a sad story behind it. Basically, the UK government has sort of owned it since the 1800s, but in the 60s decided that they wanted to put a big air base there. And the Americans have a big air base there as well, mostly so you can bomb people on the other side of the world. And so they just booted off all the people that lived on these Chagos Islands, and a bunch of them, live in the UK these days. They've been complaining for quite a few years now, I would say a couple of decades. And then this year, or a couple of weeks ago, the UK government finally agreed, following a sort of ruling by the International Court, to hand it back to not so much the Chagosians, but to Mauritius. And that puts into question .io, which is quite a popular domain name because that is attached to the Chagos Islands. So the question then becomes, does .io also shift to the Mauritian government? And if it does, what does that mean? So what's quite interesting is, and there are a lot of different rules for a lot of different CCTLDs, but in this case, .io was run by a British company because it was a British overseas territory, and then it was sold for $70 million. And now it's currently owned by big US company, Digital Identity, who makes about 30 million pounds a year from it. So, and this is not the only one in the world. There's many of these. So it's in a little way, it's a little bit like colonialism. Like we are owning the digital land for different places. And .io is popular because it's being used by a lot of the tech community.
So who gets to decide this?
IANA does, based in Los Angeles.
But who gets to decide where there's a transfer of sovereignty? Who gets to decide who then manages the .io? Does the new sovereignty have a right?
That's such a huge question. Huge question.
You know where I'm going.
I spent so many years of my life involved in these passionate discussions, and I agree with you, Kieran, that actually the plight of small islands, former colonial islands, also a lot of African states somehow lost control over their country code in the very early days of the internet. And it's
so unlike the UK government, say, which has control of its country code, the .uk.
So
it doesn't?
No, the .uk and many of the country codes are actually run by the private sector. But actually over the last 20 years or so, they have in some way usually established a relationship with their local government. But it makes the handover, where it's contested, it makes the handover really, really difficult to do, because IANA is like, listen, we're not experts in what's going on. You tell us what to do, guys, and that can take years.
Kieran, what do you think is going to happen?
Oh, that's a big question. I think what will probably happen, and what's happened in the past, is that the Mauritian government, once it realizes there's money to be had, will put in a claim for ownership of it. Then they'll reach a deal with the organization that currently runs it, Digital Identity, and they'll take a cut. That's what I think will end up happening. But it could take years, and IANA would do what it always tries to do, and as you say, stay out the way as far as humanly possible.
Thank you very much.
There's a great article in the Journal of Cyber Policy on the difference of approach between France and the UK as former colonial powers in the way that their former colonies run their CCTLDs. So France tends to run everything through its French registry, and the UK tendency has been to spin it out to private companies. And in the case of .io, that is exactly what happened, and you've had those multiple sales.
Wow.
It's a really nice article.
Thanks for that.
There's another one as well I want to throw in, which is Tuvalu, which is a little that might be wiped off the face of the planet with climate change, and that's .tv.
Yeah.
So it might be one of the first places that doesn't exist in the real world and only exists digitally, depending on what.
Under the water, it'll be still under the water. So I suppose you could start sub-water island TLDs. There's a good market for you. Anyway, we are out of time definitely today. Voice of God, do we have a comment of the week?
No.
I call you out.
Really well.
Thanks very much, Voice of God. Missed the echo there. This week we've been talking about the new global signal exchange, just to clarifying that a bit more. Today is NIS2 day, and we've had our own Joanna Grant coming on and helping us make sense of it. Joanna was very, very clear, but we all still don't really know what's going on. Ofcom are stepping up the ante in anticipation of the Online Safety Act, and they're saying that they're expecting very significant changes from the social media platforms. And Kieran has been talking about the transfer of the .io, the Chagos Islands, and what's actually going to happen to that, and issues around who should get it, the Mauritians or the Chagosians. So thank you very much. Please rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. Thank you very much.